Hi, I'm Jay Simpson, and you're listening to Glass Bookshop Radio.
Welcome to Glass Bookshop Radio. I'm your host, Jason Purcell, and I'm really excited about this week's episode because it features two friends of ours who we love deeply, Jay Simpson and Emily Riddle. These two writers are very special to us. They're without a doubt two of the smartest, sharpest writers we know. They're funny, they're stylish, and they're so good to us. In fact, Jay visited us only a few weeks after we opened our doors in October 2019, and so we got to hold a reading in their honor. The very first official reading at Glass Bookshop, and they brought the house down, of course. Emily was there and read an extraordinary essay that I haven't been able to get out of my head. So all this to say, these two are deeply entwined in Glass Bookshop's history and in our hearts. We all got together virtually to record this episode, but they really didn't need me at all. As soon as we hit record, it was like being at the best literary event you could dream of. They really showed me how it's done. So I'm not going to intervene too much. I'm just going to give you the conversation. But before we do that, let's introduce them. Jay Simpson, and if you're imagining their name in text as I say it, imagine it in lowercase. Currently resides on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish First Nations, in what is colonially known as Vancouver. They are an Oji-Cree Saulteaux Indigiqueer writer and activist, with ties to the Sapotaweyak Cree Nation with Scottish and French settler ancestry. Their poems and essays have been published in Poetry is Dead, This Magazine, PRISM International, Sad Magazine, Guts Magazine, Room, Today's Parent, Grain, Subterrane, and in the latest Landback issue of Briar Patch. You can also find their writing in Hustling Verse, an anthology of sex workers' poetry, and Love After the End, an anthology of Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer speculative fiction. It Was Never Going to Be Okay is their debut collection of poetry. Emily Riddle is nehiyaw, a member of Alexander First Nation. She's a writer, policy analyst, and a library worker based here in Musqueam on Treaty 6 territory. You can find her writing in places like Teen Vogue, the Globe and Mail, Vice, Canadian Art, PRISM International, and also in the Landback issue of Briar Patch, which is brilliant and you should all get it. Some recent additions to her bio include the forthcoming chapbook coming out next year with Moon Jelly House, which is 100% my most anticipated book of the year, and hopefully we can have Emily back on the podcast to celebrate that. Emily was also just longlisted for the CBC Poetry Prize, and I'm very obsessed with that, and I will add her page in the show notes so you can go check it out and adore her as she deserves. And finally, I just want to add that Emily Riddle is responsible for many of my quarantine footwear purchases. So the conversation you're about to hear is about Jay's recent debut poetry collection, titled It Was Never Going to Be Okay, published by Nightwood Publishing. It Was Never Going to Be Okay is a collection of poetry and prose, exploring the intimacies of understanding intergenerational trauma, indigeneity, and queerness, while addressing urban Indigenous diaspora and breaking down the limitations of sexual understanding as a trans woman. This collection kind of knocked my socks off. It's one of those debuts that's just so strong, start to finish, like no filler. And the way that like debuts from like Billy Ray Belcourt and Kinesia Lubrin and Anne-Marie Terza sort of make you sit up straighter because you know like this is a new voice who is going to be saying some things. I've read it several times already since it's been published. So if you're new to Jay's poetry, then maybe you should hold on to your socks too, or you might lose them. So why don't we jump into the conversation? Here's Jay Simpson, interviewed by Emily Riddle.
Urban Indians in the downtown East Side. Had a dozen foster parents tell me to run from my mother's truth, the track marks up her arm, shy away from the streets that they said ate her alive. Wasn't until I had rewilded onto the very streets that I recognized that it kept her alive. Harm came from the Monya men lurking in the alleys, asking for something more, like ligament or limb, wrap their fleshy digits around Ikway throat, squeeze life like pressing orange for juice. Most of my mom's sisters are dead, like her too now, caught in the crosshairs of murdered or missing. The children are working, and I make sure to say hello to my cousins. We all picked up our mother's work eventually. I've become a regular at the funeral parlor on Hastings, burying parent and child every other week. Don't have tears left once home. Save them for longer nights. Remember, there are Indian children who still need to eat. Ran onto Main and Hastings. Cried out in anguish, this place called cold, called heartless, called monster, and Ma was never the culprit, and the blame was never to be my mother's or her sister's. Rather, machines of genocide placed here by the illegal government, voted in by our now neighbors. I found truth. The mythos was fabricated, and there will always be funerals to attend, Indian children to feed.
So one of my first questions for you, Jay, I wanted to start it out with, because I told this story on my Instagram, but I remember the first day that we actually hung out and I met you, or we really had a conversation on Commercial Drive, is you talked about your debut poetry collection. So first, I just wanted to say congrats, and I'm so excited. It's been like everywhere out in the world, even though its official birthday is not till for 2 more weeks. But
Right? Isn't that just so fantastic?
yeah, it's been everywhere, which yeah, it's super beautiful, bold orange cover. I guess my one question to start off with is like, how it's been launching a book in the pandemic, because it's obviously like quite a bit different than you anticipated.
Yes, so I anticipated my name in lights and a tour and experiencing festival life in different cities because I'm very familiar with literary festivals in Vancouver. And I've been a part of several literary festivals. So I was excited to be the person to be the visitor and the guest when typically I'm an organizer. And it's been interesting in regards to me taking a step back from organizing some of the work where I have a publicist. So it's now a lot of the outreach is now out of my hands. And it's been very interesting seeing how it moves and shifts, and I am a little bit disappointed with the way it's going about in regards to the pandemic where I can't travel. My publicists are doing a fantastic job, but honestly it's just safest to stay home and do things remotely for our best interest. So I hope that one day when we are allowed to go out and about, I can do a tour again. But I fear my second book will be out by then, so it'll be a two for one, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. But there's something about the debut book tour that I was really excited for.
I know you deserve that glory, definitely.
I know, and chicken strips and karaoke.
I know, and yeah, all our Edmonton adventures for sure. I wanted you to come to the prairies. You had so much experience in like doing performance poetry and spoken word. Um, and I'm curious like how it was. I know some of these poems were first written as performance to be performed. Or like I think when I read through it, I can hear your voice obviously throughout. Because I've heard you read a good portion of these poems, and I'm just curious how it was changing them to be like in a book collection versus performed.
Yeah, so I think one of the major things is that there actually wasn't a lot of change in regard to the wording of it. I think the arrangement of it was very different because for me, my structure of oral storytelling is open to change. So oftentimes I would change the layout of the poem verbally, and I would change some of the words, or I would switch some of the words. So even reading my last poem, there were a few changes just because I find that when it's read, sometimes the words look better, and sometimes when it's performed, they feel differently. So for me, all of my performances are a little bit different and a little bit changed, and not all of them are 100% the same. But also, I come from a theater background, and that's one of the things I love the most about the stage is its temporality, where things are not 100% unless it's recorded and shared, which isn't an awful thing. It's actually a good thing for accessibility. But for me, I think there's, and this is not a hot take, this is actually a very well-founded take, is so many people look down on spoken word without realizing that the main population of spoken word and slam poets are people of color. And these people of color have rich histories of oral storytelling. And to dissuade these things and not see them as a worthy art form is just racism in academia, which we all know is not an unfamiliar conversation. But I think the world of literature has long slept on spoken word poetry, and that it's not a very large leap from stage to page, but there is a large leap from page to stage, where you see a lot of page poets just absolutely flounder, and they don't have an ounce of stage presence or charisma, uniqueness, nerve, or talent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. A lot of people don't know how to get up and make the page live up on the stage. Yeah.
Exactly. And then also at the same time, it doesn't have to be the same way. Not all of the stage performances have to be the same way, right? Like Billy Ray Balcourt's stage presence is so enamoring, but we don't perform the same way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you have very different stage vibes for sure. But he has like such a distinct like cadence when he speaks that is so
Oh,
engaging.
his voice is hypnotizing,
Yeah.
hypnotizing,
Mhm.
right? And I think we both have our own allures, but it just speaks to the differences of voices, right? Even Jessica Johns and your voice and Ariel Twist's Brandy Bird's, there's so many different ways that voice speaks out and they need to be honored. But then also there's a lot of white poets who just don't know how to perform. So
Yeah, or like, and to make that like, what I really appreciate about your performance is you very much care for the audience, and if you're gonna take them through a poem that deals with some traumatic content, then you always kind of like tell them what's gonna happen, and then also like deliver them back on a note. So that's definitely something I learned from you that you always do.
if I'm going to bring them to hell, it's my job to bring them back, I think. And also at the same time, some folks just want to have a good time, and I'm not about to trauma dump everything on someone who isn't, they're not my therapist. I'm not paying them $180 an hour.
Mhm.
So they're paying me. So.
Hmm. That's one. So Alicia Elliott recently had a Twitter thread about how her book is often reduced to like the traumatic content in it. I'm wondering if through talking to other people in your digital book tour so far, if the questions have really been focused on that rather than like form or your artistic practice, if people are like centered on the trauma in the book.
Luckily, some of my pre-festival interviews have really just focused on theme, inspiration, exploration, and how my storytelling has changed. There's been a lot of focus on my transition, which at times is a little bit uncomfortable, but you know what? As a public figure, there are some things that I do not get privacy on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been all right in regards to folks not asking about my trauma, but coming from an advocacy background where a lot of my advocacy was with Indigenous youth and care, I'm very used to white women coming up to me and saying, like, oh, you're so strong. And I'm like, I had to be strong because of people like you. So
Yeah.
this isn't a compliment. This is a backhanded slap.
Yeah.
And if given the opportunity, I will destroy you. So please keep on congratulating me because I'm just getting stronger and stronger and stronger.
Despite your best efforts.
Exactly.
Hmm. The one thing that, so I read an earlier version of this book before it was finalized, and I'm curious. One thing I was curious about is it's divided into four sections and how you came to those four different distinct sections. This is like a very text-based question, but I am curious.
Yes, the initial version you read was. didn't have any parts. It was an entire from front to back, no sections. Um, and as I was exploring it, I was feeling that, like seasons and like the relationship of transition, there are sections of the poems that I felt needed to find each other. So part one is definitely a lot of formative years. And that to me is the beginning of my life in regards to a lot of silencing and familial experiences. And to me, that was very important to preface some of my later actions in the later poems, where there is a decay immediately. And then part two is, I kind of call it my I'm not a great person section, where parts of it are I've made some mistakes, I'm trying to cope, and I'm fumbling about. And there's I start section two with a poem about being not the greatest person. And initially, this poem was actually a very shitty poem, and I changed it more into a poem that I think finds some accountability. And I talk about how the Sapphic poets don't teach you how to be accountable when you yearn. And I think that's been a huge thing for me in regards to my queer identity, is like I may long for things, but no one teaches you how to be accountable in that longing. And the third section is definitely more of the like erotic exploration of how my body is interacted with as a trans woman, um, with a history of sex work also. And to me, it's been that section is about desirability and consumption. And then section four is a section I really wanted to end with in regards to healing and leaving the audience and the reader in a good place. That was my hope, and that's what I planted in regards to some of the journeys I take them on. And of course, the hope still has some conversations on the dark places, but it section four is my investment in the future. So you could say it's like spring. So section one is winter, and section four is spring. Um, and I like the idea of spring not starting it off, and subverting the linear timelines.
hmm And it ends with "Let's begin," "Let's begin," which is like I think an allusion to all the sort of books and adventures that are to come too. And four is also a really significant number for Cree people too. Like we do really like things to be divided into four sacred
Oh
numbers.
my God, yes, exactly. I'm like, there needs to be a four and somewhere a seven.
Fours and sevens and 13s. Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking 13s also, yeah. One thing about this book is originally it was meant to have a period in the title, and that had to be dropped due to a few cataloging things, and also how um, some folks in regards to like the publishing world, not my publishers, but others, like magazines and stuff, have a difficult time with alternative titles. Um, and I've only really seen a few book titles that have had that kind of interruption. I think that's very interesting. But it was never going to be okay, ended with a period, and it was a conversation on it ending at the beginning and then beginning at the ending. Um, but I'm excited to see how people explore it. So that's just one of my little like the one of the origin stories is one of the initial drafts had a slight change in the title.
That makes sense. And it's all lowercase too. I wonder if have you seen people always typing it with all uppercase? The forever battle.
Oh my goodness. People always type my name in capital letters. People always type the book in capital letters. And I'm just like, can you please take a minute to look it up?
Yeah.
And also at the same time, it's a different stylization. It's my colonial name that I've had a very hard relationship with.
hmm
And it's difficult and it's tricky because it's not that I want to be super, super different. It's just this English name has never been um, truly important to me, other than it being relationally close to my mother's,
Mm-hmm.
but also at the same time that inheritance is a heavy inheritance.
Yeah, to sit
So it's
with.
just, please keep my name lowercase. Just it's not that important. It's just it's chill, 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 chill.
And I think like also lots of Indigenous languages are written without capitalization because we don't have that sort of hierarchy in our languages too. You'll see often when people are writing Cree that they'll capitalize things and we don't. It's not just like I've seen some tweets that are like, oh, there's the bisexuals always like writing with their all their lowercase tweets. And it is stylistic, but it's also has meaning behind using all lowercase.
Well, also at the same time, capital to me is like an automatic like assumption of respect, and I think that is an ode to anyone, and that assumption that you're so important, to me, is just beyond me. Um, yes, there's ego, and yes, there's work and stuff like that, but I'm just like, chill out. Like, I am totally the kind of like bisexual who tweets in all lowercase, like auto capitalization off at all times, please and thank you, unless I expect it to be retweeted, and then I'll throw in some grammar.
I know it's always a battle. I'm like, because I see all these tweets that are like, people have to capitalize Indigenous, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I just prefer to tweet in all lowercase no matter what. I don't know. Yeah.
I definitely have respect for other folks who were like, this word needs to be capitalized. For
Yeah.
me, sometimes I get in trouble when I don't. There have been some people who have barked at me for not capitalizing the I in Indigenous, and I'm like, you are barking up the wrong tree, please.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Is there I don't know if you could talk a bit about because I was witness to the like various covers, and I don't think that any of the Glass Bookshop folks, where you and I would deny that covers are very important to us. Judge a book by its cover. So if you could talk a bit
hmm
about like the colors and how you came to this design choice, because I really loved the cover and how it turned out.
Yes, thank you. Do you remember what I had said about my own book cover in the very beginning before any of the versions came out?
What did exactly did you say? Like if it's ugly or something that you'll I don't
I
remember.
said, if it's ugly, I'm going to change my name and move.
Yeah.
But um, Angela, Yen, and Silas and the whole team at Nightwood did a really good job. And it's just been a very beautiful process. The version that we see today is after me being a nitpicky, um, I wouldn't say monster, but I am nitpicky. And so the versions I got were different colors. So there was like a dark blue one who had like a
Mhm.
sleeping statue on it. There was a green one. There was one with roses. There were one with vines. There were just multiple versions in multiple ways. But to me, I was like, okay, I need something that pulls the eye and isn't just a black cover for me.
Mhm.
I really wanted it to be something that is visually appealing also. So one of the major themes within the book is there is a lot of flora and fauna in the book. There's a lot of plant life that exists alongside of my poetry. So there's a lot of plant life in the book, and also the statue is very important because of migration mythology references. Where I don't even think they're references; they are people that exist within in the covers that are conduits for a lot of the stories that need to be told, and also they are so large that it is a way for me to almost remove myself from some of the truth of the situation. And the cover is just a way that um, moves and shows a lot of what's going on. And sometimes you see covers that don't actually are in deep, 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 deep relationship with the work in the in the book itself. Um, and so I wanted to make it very, very, very abundantly clear that the cover was in relationship with the content. And I think some books of poetry that do a really good job of that are David Lee's with Mythical Man with the snake scales on the cover, and the poems within have that reptilian snake essence in it. So I think he does a really good job of that. And I also kind of felt a little guilty with the cover of being like, do I make it super indigenous? And then I'm like, I I want it to be honest to myself, and I want it to be true to who I am. And inherently everything I do is an aspect of indigeneity, but just because it isn't in the traditional style doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah. I do I think about that a lot too, like this aesthetic of like folks wanting to be obviously indigenous, and that's like something that like you and I probably like we do deal with as people who are lighter skinned indigenous people too, like the sort of like flagging, whether it's
And
on your person or yeah, and on a book is a different thing.
yeah, and I wanted to be careful because we live in an age where a lot of settlers are buying beadwork and patches and indigenous art that is very wearable, that isn't regalia. And that kind of flagging at times scares me because it's like I'm wearing that same thing, and it's a way for me to feel comfortable in owning this now, but also at the same time, the perception of it is worrisome for me at times. But then also at the same time, I'm a white native, so I need to just shut up. You know what I mean? Like there are bigger there are bigger issues at play for my Black and visibly Indigenous kin out there right now.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. My favorite poem in the collection, and like I think it changes, but my favorite poem when I read through it again today, is definitely Waterways. And so the line that I kept returning to was, "Non-prairie folk do not understand that burning down does not mean the end. Oftentimes, when we prairie marshlanders rise from the blackened mud, we are the monsters of nightmares, without them ever realizing we had ensured the health of the land and our people." And so this theme of monsters or monstrosity is like something that is throughout the collection and throughout your other writing. So I know that's a sort of important theme. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so a big a big thing for me is I get the villain edit a lot. It is something I've grown to terms with in regards to the fact that, and I allude to telling the truth in the first section, metal biting down I, where it says, when I speak, I often bleed. And telling the truth and speaking out has been difficult because there have been so many times where I've just remained silent. And when I spoke, I realized that it was incendiary. It caught things ablaze and things burned to the ground. And at first, for a very long time, I was vilified for it, where I was being told I was destructive and destroying people's comfort. And at one point, I snapped and I said, why is your comfort more important than my safety?
Yeah,
And in that, I kind of fully became Maleficent, where I was just like, I I'm not into this anymore. I'm not into this palatability that exists, and I am going to burn what needs to be burned, and what comes out of it is what comes out of it. And after a while, some of the things that I burned to the ground, what came out of it was some very beautiful, radical work. And still the narrative I got was that I was the person who lit it ablaze and that I was this monster. But then as I began to explore my intimacies, very quickly I realized the way my body and identity was being consumed was I'm desirable, but also after those interactions, people are repulsed, and I'm a monster in that way too. So there became this really, really hard relationship where, in my personal life, interpersonally, in intimate relationships, I was deemed a monster for existing. But then in my public life, I was also deemed monstrous in that way. And I began to explore the ways in which controlled burning saves our territories. And we're seeing that now with a lot of the forest fires here, where the ability for us to destroy things so that they don't destroy everything later is so important. And the idea of destruction being the end is a colonial idea that I prefer like deconstructing in regards to rebuilding later. And I think the ability for us to um, continuously come back speaks to our just ancestral integrity that a lot of settlers just don't have. So when they burn up and they're gone, while we burn up and we just keep on coming back again and again and again.
Hmm. Yeah, non-prairie folk do not understand. So that's the
Exactly.
other thing. Go ahead.
Well, I think in regards to that poem, it was more of the complete destruction that I like to participate in, where um, I will go toe to toe with people. You know, I've gone toe to toe with the Minister of Child and Family Development in British Columbia. I've gone toe to toe with federal ministers. I've gone toe to toe with heavy hitters and been like, I will fight you here and now in front of
Hmm.
hundreds of people. Let's go.
Yeah.
And I think there are many people who know how to burn, but there's not enough people who know what it's like to be the one burning and igniting things.
Hmm. And it like has to be like, even though people don't perceive it to be this, like it has to be all the time. It has to be so calculated because like trans women are always more vilified for just like telling the truth, or people assume that it's like more aggressive than it was, even if you're just like actually like simply stating something. So it's
Yeah, and even when I have an emotional reaction, that emotional reaction is vilified. And I've experienced that over the past few years, where someone will say something extremely transphobic and I'll have an emotional reaction and I'll say that's transphobic. And then the response is like, well, why don't you calmly educate me instead of crying? Like, why that? And it's like, I have the ability to mourn what you just said and feel that pain. You're doing this so you don't have to be accountable. You're deflecting, and you're used to folks coming to you in a palatable way. But guess what? I'm not going to sell myself short for you. I'm not that kind of girl. No, thank you.
or like have some compassion for like the person you just hurt rather than making it about yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah,
Exactly.
definitely.
Exactly. And if you want to vilify me, guess what? I will come up and I will salt your yard. If you want me to be the bad, if you want me to be the big bad wolf, I will. You know what? And it'll be a great show for a lot of people.
So I see, obviously, you have a relationship to the prairies where I am now, or a different part of the prairies, but I am on the prairies right now, and have lived most of your life on the West Coast, although also in the interior BC. So I see like a lot of references to the various landscapes and lands that you have relationship to in the book as well, as like a diasporic Cree person. And oh, sorry, I'm not going to
Mhm.
erase you and just call you Cree. But as a
I am
diasporic,
Swampy Cree. Do not forget.
yes, I'll never forget. Not a Plains Cree. But yeah, if you like, because you've spent some more time on the prairies in the last few years, and I see that like you write about that return back to that place.
That return, at one point, the resolve I had was that I had such a fear of going back because of the homophobia and transphobia that existed in a lot of the cities, where oftentimes uh, queer Indigenous folks escape to. And my biggest fear, I guess, came from my grandmother, who disowned me for being queer. And it was a very traumatic experience. And she's been a huge barrier for me accessing my relationship to lands.
Hmm.
In fact, I wrote a poem about her in the book. Um, and I had kind of come to the resolution that I was not coming back. And an opportunity arose for me to return without her, without needing her And I took it, and I was so, 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 so scared. And when I returned, I was met with people who knew my family, who knew my mom, who knew my grandma, who knew my great grandma, who knew my great great grandma, who knew people I didn't even know existed. I met cousins I didn't know that existed, and I met other trans women who worked with the community, who were in the community, who were from the community, who were thriving. And I think that was maybe um, my own fears of being like, okay, this is the res. They're going to be homophobic and transphobic, and it was upended. And I think I needed that. I needed that very, very, very big wake up call of my own perception of my own people was so flawed because of my own internalized racism, because of foster care and experiences with other Indigenous folks, that I needed it to be upended. And I experienced such healing there and such relationship that like I constantly want to go back. I really just want to be in relationship with those people.
Mm-hmm.
And if I am to be very loud, I need to be in relationship with my belly button, and that needs to be more a priority, I think, in the future for me. But of course, the pandemic happened, and I was unable to go back this summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my relationship to land has always been important because although due to foster care I was moved around a lot, the territories were always the place I clung to and not the houses. And I found healthy relationships, and I found hope, and I found joy in these places. And I can't ignore that. I think it's very disingenuous to ignore parts of your creation story. So I will always write about the land that holds me because it is alive, and it's something that I will continue to be in relationship with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as complicated as that sort of like diasporic story is, or just like most Indigenous writers' story of relationship to territory and family, it's also like very fruitful to write about always too. And I think like so Jay and I
Hmm.
came to know each other when I lived in Vancouver, and we had like a group of like all prairie Indigenous people that kind of clung to each other too. So I think you like find territory and relationship in other people. Like I do think that like prairie Indigenous people, like I don't know, have distinct cultural like kind of humor and relationships to each other, and like shared specific history that other folks don't always get.
Exactly. And like our relationship to food and dance and culture are so different from like when you were in Vancouver, our relationship to salmon is very different. And also, when I returned to the prairies, I was like, oh my gosh, everyone is singing so high when I'm so used to the low singing that is West Coast. Like I am so used to the deep, deep, deep baritones. And then when I came to my home territories, I was like, ooh, this is very, very interesting in regards to that cultural shift. And it shifted how I interacted with other folks because I longed for that kinship and that knowing.
hmm Yeah, and you found it. Like those all those people kind of like find each other always.
It's been a very gorgeous 2 years of us knowing each other, and our dinners and our brunches and our get-togethers, and I think that's been so important to being an adult and being in relationship with other people, and also sticking up for each other has been really amazing and brilliant and beautiful to see.
Yeah, definitely. We have fought some people in the last 2 years. Yeah,
It is
I'm
known.
wondering. Yeah, that's for sure. What are you? So I'm sure that you're probably almost done a second poetry collection, but I feel like we should end off with you talking about like your current projects or what's to come, because I know that there's probably a lot on the burner, and you had a recent short story that came out in a collection, as well as an essay in Briar Patch that's been circulated everywhere too. So could you talk about some of your other projects?
Yeah, so I like to think that I'm not just a poet, I'm so much more. And so recently, the short story is in a queer sci-fi Indigenous futurisms anthology, edited by Joshua Whitehead, published by Arsenal Pulp Press, and um, it's been a very beautiful thing to work on because I wrote about um, a very dire situation in regards to, like, Earth being unlivable, but a lot of QT BIPOC folks escaping to a new utopia, and the journey that happens, and kinship and trans woman affirmations that has been important to me. And working with Joshua has been a very beautiful process. A fantastic editor, like a fantastic, tender, firm editor who gave me, when I got the edits, I screamed because I was like, okay, these are so necessary, so necessary. Thank you so much. But I was unprepared of my own delusions of grandeur. Um, and so I always appreciate an editor who is just like, okay, that's not going to work, but this is going to work. And
Mhm.
I think Joshua is a very generous editor and a very generous person who has been so supportive of me from the get go. And so that's been a very beautiful project that we've seen finish. And the creation story of that is very interesting, but that's for another time. And the Briar Patch essay was so difficult to write,
Mhm.
given what's been going on in regards to Black Lives Matter and land back, and a lot of the Black and Indigenous trans women, specifically on Turtle Island, who have been experiencing such violence. It was such a hard essay to write, but such a necessary one. And working alongside Wes Harmon to illustrate that was a very, like, seeing what Wes did was a very beautiful thing. And um, being in a community with Wes is very important, and how Ariel Twist's work and relationship with me inspired that also. Currently, I'm working on a short little one act play. I am working on some poetry. I am doing a few things here and there, but I'm trying to take it easy. My partner just got out of a pretty major surgery, so I'm trying to find time to honor myself and my creativity, but also at the same time um, helping my partner heal in a very good way. So it's been a very busy time, and I always have a million and one things on the go, as you know, as you do also. Um, and you're correct, I am working on a second manuscript. But I am not nearly done it. I just finished the first poem like 2 days ago. So it's going to be a while for that to happen. But I am working also on a novel. So it's like, where's the chill? There's no chill.
Yeah, you
Um,
just
so there, so I've been doing so much, but also at the same time trying to say no to things. So
yeah. Like, and we're in a global pandemic, and like the world is very upsetting this year in general. So it's good to try and
yeah,
say no. I'm not good at that, but yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey to say the least.
Definitely. I'm so excited for, yeah, for this book to be officially birthed in 2 weeks, and just for it to be in the world. And thank you for talking to me today. Hi, Mr. Hay. I'm wondering
Oh,
if
Chinique Witch.
you could I'm wondering if you could finish us off with another poem from the collection, please.
Yes, for sure. Also, congratulations on your upcoming chapbook of poetry. Who knew?
Thank
Oh, I'm
you.
so excited for that. Okay. This is a poem that introduced me to Jason, actually, and Matthew, and a few other folks. And it's also one of my very first published pieces. Healing Sacrifice Necessity. Saltwater brine and pine needle poultice on fresh flesh wound where the knife bit, and silver needle binding angry red back together, clenched teeth biting down on hardened leather, sage ash and red clay smeared on my face, tears streaking. Reopen old wounds to drain decade-old poison, and use traditional medicine to heal these adhesions, abrasions, and bruises. Grow hair out to braid in sweetgrass and twigs. Use creek cool clay to set fragmented and fractured bones. Lay tobacco tie after tobacco tie down. I am worth every single one. My healing is worth every prayer, every song, every ceremony. Sage lit and smoke lingering, swirling embers carried on seaward breezes, the scent, sweet and pungent. The ancestors call to me through the smoke. This controlled burn will bring about new old-growth forest soon enough. There is a sacredness in cutting old hurt out, a sanctity in naming it, the ways I've been taken, a sacrifice in holding it gently and firmly. The old ways lead us to new ways, new waters, new healings, new learnings. It hurts in the moment, but feeling uncomfortable is a necessary part of growing. I shed my clothes now, walk tentatively through the cold. My bare feet leave footprints on the wet sand, the waves pulling at the shore, the bonfire heat to my exposed back, the darkness of the ocean calling out, the drums and the low growl of their song pushing me further into the vastness of the salt water depth. Wading into coolness, sharp burning across my naked breast as I drift into her. We've done this so many times before, and now her touch lingers. Ash, clay, and blood leaking into her, and she is soaking into me. This healing hurts more than the pattern of previous takings. The grip of her is seductive, and I needn't want to leave. They come for me, rip me back to shore, return me to the fire, smoke clinging to all parts of me, and I let the fire wrap around my pallid and obvious flesh. Feel my hair go up in acrid salt blaze. The nerves of my fingers reverberate for the first time in years. Feel myself for the first time in a long while. Feel myself leaving. One last and final taking. Out of the necessity I burn. Out of the necessity I am taken. Miigwech, thank you so much, and thank you to Glass Bookshop and everything that is going on there. It looks like a lot of queer joy.
And that's our episode. Huge thanks go to Jaye, Simpson, and Emily Riddle for taking the time to have this great conversation and to share so much with us. You can order Jaye's book, It Was Never Going to Be Okay, at glassbookshop.com, which will be linked in the show notes, and you can keep an eye out for Emily's chapbook to come. We'll definitely be posting about it. So thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, however it is you do that, and leave a rating and a review. It's tremendously helpful, and it allows us to reach new people. You can also find us on the socials. We are at Glass Bookshop on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And you can order all sorts of things from us at glassbookshop.com, and we deliver free in Edmonton, St. Albert, and Sherwood Park, and we mail internationally. So tune in next time for another great conversation. Until then, this has been Glass Bookshop Radio. Our producer is Makda Mulatu. Our artwork is by Michelle Campos-Castillo. The music's by me, and we record right here in Amiskwaciwâskahikan, Treaty 6, Edmonton, Alberta. Talk to you soon.